"Ma'am, we need you to step out of your house with your hands where we can see them." That was the first thing I heard before my front yard was filled with flashing red and blue lights. I was in my pajamas. My hair was still wet from my shower, and I was holding my favorite coffee mug when I looked outside and saw 3 squad cars blocking my ranch gate, like I was some kind of criminal. My ranch dog, Duke, was barking like crazy from the porch. One of the officers had his hand near his holster. Another was on the radio. The third one walked toward my front door with serious eyes like I was holding hostages inside. What in the world was happening? "Is your name Marcus Dalton?" one of the cops asked sternly. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" "We received a complaint from the HOA that someone is unlawfully occupying this property. The caller said you're trespassing and living here without permission. Do you have any proof this land is yours?" I nearly dropped my coffee. Trespassing? I own this ranch. It was passed down to me from my grandfather, who built it with his bare hands. This place has been in my family for 3 generations. There was no HOA here when we bought it, not even when I moved in permanently last year to retire early and live quietly. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, stunned. The cop didn't smile. "Do you have paperwork proving ownership?" Before I could answer, there she was, marching up my dirt driveway in high heels and a bright red blouse like she owned the whole mountain. Karen. Her real name was Diane Wilkins, but everyone around town just called her Karen. She was the new president of the HOA from the neighboring gated community, Evergreen Heights, a fancy place built 2 years ago near the south side of my ranch. She stood with her arms folded, chin high, sunglasses on, like she just defeated a dragon. "I told you, officers," she said, "he doesn't belong here. This land falls under our HOA expansion zone. He didn't respond to the notices we mailed out last month. He's violating property rules by keeping livestock, running an unregistered generator, and building without HOA approval. We want him evicted." Evicted? I was too stunned to speak. The officer looked back at me. "Sir, until we confirm your ownership, we're going to have to ask you to step away from the house. You'll be detained for questioning." That's when Duke growled and stood in front of me. That's when I finally lost my calm. That's when I pulled out my wallet, opened the hidden flap behind my driver's license, and handed over the original deed to the land, signed, sealed, and notarized. But what happened after that changed everything. Now let's go back to the beginning. Hi, my name is Marcus Dalton. I'm 54 years old, a proud retired firefighter, and I live on a 30-acre ranch in Colorado. I'm not married. No kids. Just me and Duke, my loyal German Shepherd rescue who's more like family than pet. After 26 years of service and 2 back surgeries, I decided to retire early. The city was noisy, and my apartment lease was up. So I did what every small-town raised man dreams of. I went back to the land my grandpa left me. An untouched patch of freedom surrounded by pine trees, deer, clean air, and peace. Or so I thought. See, for the first few months everything was calm. I fixed up the old barn, set up solar panels, built a greenhouse, and even started growing vegetables. It was the life I had dreamed of. Quiet mornings, coffee on the porch, Duke chasing butterflies. I felt like I finally had my peace. But peace is a funny thing. It bothers some people when they don't understand it. Especially Karen. The first time I met her was during a supply run to the local town store. I was buying fence nails and chicken feed. She was buying sparkling water and complaining loudly on the phone about someone parking too close to her luxury SUV. Our eyes met briefly, and I nodded politely. She gave me a quick glance and then looked away, like I was the dirt on her tire. The second time was worse. She drove up the dirt road to my ranch entrance one morning and rang the old brass bell I hung from the gatepost. "You need to join the HOA," she said, before I could even say hello. "This land is now part of the Evergreen Heights district. You're required to follow our community rules." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. I explained calmly that my land wasn't part of any HOA. I had checked the records before moving in. She shook her head and handed me a printed welcome package with a $900 initiation fee and a 34-page booklet listing rules like No livestock within visual range, no outdoor tools left visible after 6 p.m., and lawns must be uniformly green. I thought it was a prank. She didn't. I handed her back the package. Not interested, ma'am. That was the day the war began. The following week, someone painted red arrows on my trees, marking them for removal. My mailbox got smashed. My Wi-Fi cable, buried underground, got cut clean in two. And once, Duke came home limping after someone apparently threw a rock at him near the border fence. But I didn't retaliate. I kept to myself. I just wanted peace. Karen didn't. One afternoon, a man in a suit knocked on my door and said I was being fined $3,000 for non-compliance with HOA visual standards. I told him to leave. He handed me a pink envelope and walked away. That envelope? It was from Karen. A fake notice. I called the county office. They confirmed, "Sir, your property is not under any HOA jurisdiction." I took a breath of relief, but Karen wasn't done. She doubled down. She started taking photos from her SUV parked across the dirt road. She harassed delivery drivers. She blocked my driveway by accident 3 times. And worst of all, she began spreading lies in town, that I was squatting illegally on unclaimed land. I tried to ignore it all, until that morning, when the cops showed up. As I stood there with the original deed in my hand, I watched Karen's expression change. Her smug smile faded slowly. The officer took the document, walked to his patrol car, and began making calls. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then the officer stepped out of the car, and what he said made Karen freeze like a deer in headlights. "Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and wait till you hear what happens next." Because karma? Oh, it came back for Karen in a way no one saw coming. The officer cleared his throat and turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, according to the county records, this ranch is 100% owned by Mr. Marcus Dalton. It is not, and has never been, under the Evergreen Heights HOA jurisdiction." Karen's jaw tightened. Her lips pursed like she'd bitten into a lemon. But that can't be right," she stammered. "We sent out expansion notices. We passed a unanimous vote in our last HOA meeting. This land falls within the growth zone." The officer shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, expansion notices are not legal property claims. You cannot just annex someone else's land with a vote. That's not how property law works." I crossed my arms and raised an eyebrow. Duke, now seated calmly beside me, let out a low, satisfied growl. The second officer approached with my deed in hand and handed it back to me. "Apologies for the misunderstanding, Mr. Dalton. You're fully within your rights. You're free to continue living here." I nodded, though my hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "Thanks, officers. I hope this is the last time we have to go through something like this." One of them muttered, "You and me both." That's when Karen snapped. "This is not over," she screamed, pointing at me like I had just stolen her mansion. "He doesn't belong here. He doesn't fit the community standard. Look at his weeds and his chickens." "Yes, ma'am," one of the officers said sarcastically. "We'll be sure to file a report on his poultry." I almost laughed out loud. But what happened next was even better. Karen stormed off in her heels back to her luxury SUV, but not before stepping into a fresh pile of Duke's morning deposit. The loud squish echoed through the silence. She screamed. It was glorious. After that incident, I thought it might finally be over. But that would have been too easy. Karen wasn't just a meddler. She was a full-blown control freak with too much time and not enough resistance. That weekend, my neighbor Jake came by. Jake owns the last house in Evergreen Heights, right by the edge where my property begins. He's a good man, mid-60s, former Navy, with strong arms and a calm voice. He brought over a fresh peach cobbler and shook his head as he sat on my porch. "Karen's telling everyone at the clubhouse that you forged your land deed," he said. "She's trying to get the HOA to hire a lawyer." "She can try," I replied. I've got the original documents and the county office behind me. Jake sighed. She's obsessed, Marcus. She doesn't like things she can't control. She's already called a landscaper to survey your side of the tree line. Claims the HOA might put up a perimeter fence. Let her try to touch one tree on my land, I muttered, tightening my grip on my coffee cup. Just one. Jake gave me a warning look. You should be careful. She's sneaky. She makes trouble and lets other people carry it out. He was right. 2 days later, I found a strange white pickup truck parked just off my south field. A man in a hard hat was walking around with a clipboard taking notes. I approached him. Can I help you? He looked up and smiled. Yeah, I was hired to assess the area for some planned fencing, HOA project, said the land was in dispute. Who hired you? Karen Wilkins. I clenched my jaw. You're on private property. You're trespassing. His face dropped. Oh, I was told this was part of the HOA district. It's not. You're on Dalton Ranch. If you don't leave now, I'll call the sheriff and press charges. He left. But now I knew she was still trying to get to me. Only this time she was using others to do her dirty work. So I decided to beat her at her own game, with kindness and a paper trail. I drove down to the county clerk's office the next morning and requested updated property line documentation. I even got an official surveyor to remark my boundary lines with bright orange stakes. Then I made photocopies, lots of them. The next HOA meeting, I showed up. Karen was at the podium, mid-sentence, trying to convince the room that some outsiders were endangering the value of their community. That's when I walked in, boots dusty, flannel shirt on, holding a thick stack of folders. Every head turned. Karen stopped mid-sentence. I stood before the room, introduced myself calmly, and handed out copies of my land deed, the survey map, and a legal notice warning that any further interference would be met with legal action. This is not a fight, I said. I've lived here peacefully and quietly. I've harmed no one. All I ask is to be left alone. This is my land, not part of your HOA. I have no interest in joining, but I do have interest in keeping my land safe from harassment. The room went quiet. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. Then, one older man stood up. I don't see why we're even discussing this. If the land's not in our district, then this isn't our business, another woman chimed in. He brought the papers. She brought nothing but noise. Karen was fuming. You're all making a mistake. He's going to bring down our home values. That's when Jake stood up beside me. The only thing bringing down the value of this neighborhood is your behavior, Karen. The crowd clapped. I left that meeting with a small smile. But Karen? Karen was just getting started. Because 2 nights later I woke up to find my entire south field flooded, water rushing like a small river, fence posts torn down, chicken coop half submerged. I jumped out of bed, ran outside in boots and pajamas and tried to stop the flow with sandbags, but it was too late. The water was coming from a broken irrigation line, a pipe that had been deliberately sabotaged. And guess whose SUV I saw speeding away down the dirt road? Karen's. I stood there, soaked to the knees, heart pounding with fury. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And next, I was going to fight back, but not the way she expected, because I had a plan. And this time, karma wouldn't just knock, it would kick down her perfectly painted door. The flood destroyed more than just my south field. It ruined half of my early harvest, rows of corn, lettuce, and tomatoes gone under muddy water. My chicken coop had to be pulled apart and rebuilt. One of the goats got tangled in the wire fencing and nearly drowned before I got to him. And to top it off, the wooden tool shed, which I had just refurbished, tilted sideways from the soft, waterlogged soil and collapsed. That night I barely slept. Not because of the damage, though that was bad enough, but because I now knew, without a single doubt, that Karen had declared war. But what she didn't know was that I was about to hit back harder. I made calls the next morning. First to the sheriff's department. I reported the flood as a suspected act of vandalism. Then, I reached out to a local environmental inspector I knew through a veterans group, His name was Todd, tall, bald, and honest as they come. When I told him what happened, he agreed to come out and investigate for free. Todd showed up in his old green Jeep, took one look at the damage and said, "Yeah, that wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with the control valve up the ridge." We followed the pipe uphill, about 300 yards up a narrow path behind the tree line. That's where we found it. The valve box cover was ripped off, the pressure release twisted open unnaturally, and a single red bracelet bead laying in the dirt. I picked it up. I'd seen that bead before. Karen wore those red crystal bracelets like they were part of her soul. She had 5 different ones she rotated weekly, always bright, always matching her outfits. Todd whistled. "You want me to file an environmental complaint?" I nodded. "Do it, and document everything." We took photos, GPS coordinates, and a sample of the disturbed soil. It wasn't just a case of water damage. It was a direct attack on agricultural property. In Colorado, that was a serious offense, especially since my land wasn't under HOA regulation. Still, I didn't confront Karen. Not yet. Instead, I got to work quietly. I rebuilt the chicken coop better than before, this time elevated with concrete blocks and flood drains. I reinforced the fencing. I even started recording my land with motion-triggered trail cameras. If she came back, I'd have her on video. But Karen wasn't done. The next week, she sent 2 county officers to my ranch. They claimed they were responding to a health complaint filed by an anonymous source. Something about unclean water and improper animal waste disposal. The moment they stepped onto my land, Duke went wild. But I calmed him down and greeted the officers politely. "Come in," I said. "Let me show you around." They inspected everything, from my compost bin to my water filters. One officer, an older woman named Officer Lynn, seemed impressed by the setup. "This is one of the cleanest systems I've seen out here," she said, jotting notes. "Everything's compliant." I gave her a knowing look. "You think Karen sent you?" She raised an eyebrow but didn't answer. 2 days later, I received a letter. No violations found. That made 2 failed attacks. Karen was losing steam. But then came her biggest mistake. One afternoon, I was tending to the goats near the northern fence when I heard shouting. Not the usual HOA drama kind of shouting, but panic. I climbed the hill and saw it. Flames. Smoke billowed from the edge of the Evergreen Heights property line. A small shed behind one of the luxury homes had caught fire, and the wind was pushing it toward the tall grass on my side. Without thinking, I grabbed my fire hose, turned on the emergency pump, and ran to the edge of my field. I fought the fire for over 20 minutes before the fire department arrived. By then, the flames had been stopped, right at my fence line. I was covered in ash, panting, and soaked in sweat. But I had saved their homes. And who came running down the hill? Karen. She froze when she saw me holding the hose. You set this fire," she screamed. "You're trying to burn us down. This is revenge." The fire chief, who had just walked over, raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this man just saved your entire row of houses. The fire started from a tipped-over grill on your neighbor's deck." Karen went red, not from heat, from embarrassment. She opened her mouth to argue but caught the look on everyone's faces. For the first time, the community saw her for what she truly was. But that moment, that wasn't the karma. That came the next morning. I was sipping coffee on my porch when a black SUV rolled up my driveway. Out stepped Todd, the environmental inspector, with a folder in his hand and a grin on his face. "You're gonna love this," he said, handing me the papers. The environmental board had launched a full investigation. Turns out, not only had Karen tampered with the water valve, but she had also illegally diverted runoff from her neighborhood into a natural creek bed, causing contamination downstream. Worse, the HOA had no permits for the landscaping projects Karen had authorized on the border zones. That included trenching and dumping soil waste into protected zones on my side. I looked through the report and laughed. "I can take this to court, right?" Todd nodded. "You can, And you should. That afternoon I made copies of the report. But instead of mailing them to a lawyer, I took a short walk, right into the Evergreen Heights Community Center. A town meeting was in progress. Karen was mid-rant again, trying to rally people against me. I stepped inside, silent. Jake spotted me first, then nodded. I walked to the front, dropped the report folder on the table, and said just one thing. I didn't burn your shed down, but karma's just getting started. Karen picked up the folder, flipped through it, and her face turned pale. The crowd fell silent. One man stood up in the back. Karen, is this true? She didn't answer. Another woman, clutching the same welcome package I'd once been handed, shook her head. You tried to ruin him, while hiding all this from us? Karen stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. I didn't know. There must be some mistake. But it was too late. The HOA board members demanded an emergency meeting. Karen was asked to step down. Not next week. Not next month. Immediately. And as she walked out, red-faced and trembling, she turned and looked at me like I had destroyed her empire. But I didn't. She did. All I did was defend what was mine. As I turned to leave the room, a small clap began. Then another. And another. The whole room applauded. Not because I won, but because someone finally stood up to the queen of HOA chaos. But just when I thought it was all over, a legal notice arrived in the mail the following morning. It wasn't from Karen. It was from the HOA's new acting president. And what it said changed everything. The letter came in a clean white envelope, stamped with the official Evergreen Heights HOA seal and signed in blue ink. It was addressed to me, Marcus Dalton. The new acting HOA president was a soft-spoken woman named Rebecca Granger. I'd met her briefly at the meeting where Karen had been forced to step down. She seemed fair, level-headed, and even thanked me for showing the truth. But the letter in my hands? It was anything but friendly. I read the first line and nearly dropped my coffee mug. Dear Mr. Dalton, in light of recent events, the HOA board has decided to pursue an official boundary correction petition to annex the disputed land into the Evergreen Heights Association. A vote has been passed to proceed with legal filings. I stopped reading. My blood boiled. After everything, after I saved their homes, after I cleared my name, after I endured harassment and sabotage, they still wanted my land? They were now trying to legally take it? No, not again. I sat down, breathing hard, trying to calm the storm inside me. Duke paced beside me, sensing my tension. I picked up the letter again, reading the last part. This petition will include your south and east fields, with a request to rezone these areas as HOA common land, citing environmental maintenance concerns and communal safety. They were claiming my fields were dangerous, that I couldn't maintain my own land, that it should be taken and cared for by them. I couldn't believe it. I immediately called the county clerk's office. I need to file a formal objection to a boundary annexation petition, I said. The clerk on the phone was helpful. Come in tomorrow morning, bring all your documents. You'll need to submit a legal opposition before the petition is reviewed. I hung up the phone. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was defending my freedom. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I dug through every file box I had. My grandfather's original land sketches, the deed, the photographs. I even found an old signed affidavit where my father confirmed the ranch had never been subdivided. When morning came, I was already on the road before the sun rose. At the county office, I sat across from a kind clerk named Julia who helped me file the formal paperwork. She read through my evidence, shaking her head. I've never seen anything like this, she said. It's like they think they can just redraw maps with a vote. They've done worse, I muttered. She stamped the opposition papers. This will put a freeze on their petition until the matter goes before the land board. How long does that take? Could be weeks, maybe a month. I thanked her, shook her hand, and left with a copy of the stamped notice. But something still felt wrong. Why would Rebecca, someone who seemed decent, push forward with this? I decided to pay her a visit. I drove to the Evergreen Heights Community Center that afternoon. Rebecca was there, seated alone, sorting folders. She looked up and gave a nervous smile. "Mr. Dalton, I was expecting you." "You knew this would upset me," I said, holding up the letter. "After everything I went through with Karen, you knew what this would look like." She sighed. "Marcus, it's not personal. It feels personal. There's pressure from some of the board members. They say the flooding was a sign your land's irrigation system is unstable, that it poses a risk to the adjacent properties. I don't agree, but I was outvoted." I leaned forward. "And you didn't think to tell them I saved those homes? That I rebuilt the whole southern fence line because of that flood?" "I did, but the board is still afraid of lawsuits from other homeowners. They think absorbing your land into the HOA will give them more control and cover." "Cover," I repeated. "You mean they want control so they don't have to take responsibility?" Rebecca didn't answer. I stood up, my voice steady. "You're just Karen in a different outfit." Her face turned red. "That's not fair." "No," I cut in. "What's not fair is trying to steal a man's land under the excuse of communal safety. You tell your board they'll have to fight me in court, and they won't win." I left the building without another word, but my phone buzzed before I even reached the truck. A message. From Jake. "Marcus, you need to come quick. You're not going to believe this." I raced down the dirt road toward the ridge on the west side of my property, the border that separated my ranch from the last row of HOA homes. Jake met me at the clearing, waving frantically. "Look," he said, pointing toward the open space. I froze. The HOA had sent in bulldozers, 3 of them. They were clearing a path through the tree line. The path led directly into my west field. "They're starting construction," Jake said breathlessly. "They're calling it a community walking trail expansion, but they've already crossed into your boundary." I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the scene. One of the workers held a clipboard with the HOA seal. Another was marking trees with orange spray paint. I could see the stakes, my stakes, being pulled up from the dirt. My fists clenched. They weren't just filing paperwork anymore. They were trespassing, destroying property, cutting into my land. It wasn't just HOA bullying now. It was criminal. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Then I dialed 911. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" "Yes, I'd like to report an active trespass and property destruction in progress. I have legal boundaries on file and the suspects are operating heavy machinery on my land." "Are you in danger, sir?" "No," I said coldly, "but they're about to be." Within 20 minutes, 2 sheriff cruisers were speeding up the dirt path. The officers exited, assessed the scene, and shut down the entire operation. One of the bulldozer drivers tried to argue, but the sheriff held up my boundary documents and told them they were on protected land. The best part? As the workers packed up and left, a news van arrived. Apparently, Jake had called in a favor. His niece worked for a local station. A cameraman got footage of the whole standoff, and I gave a calm, recorded statement while standing next to Duke. "This land has been in my family for over 70 years. I will not be intimidated, and I will not be pushed off my own ranch." That night, the story aired across 3 counties. The headline: "Local rancher defends family land against aggressive HOA takeover." By morning, my phone was filled with messages from neighbors, old friends, and even strangers thanking me for standing up. But Karen wasn't done yet. Later that day, I got an anonymous email. No name, no subject, just a single sentence. "Check the HOA financial report." Something's buried there, and what I uncovered next shocked me more than anything Karen had ever done. I stared at that anonymous email for a long minute. Check the HOA financial report. It sounded like a wild goose chase, but I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. It was the same one I had the day before the flood. The same one I got when Karen tried to accuse me of arson. Someone was tipping me off. And it wasn't just some online troll. Whoever sent that message knew something that could change everything. I remembered that HOA documents, like meeting minutes and budgets, were technically public within the neighborhood. Since my ranch wasn't part of the HOA, I didn't have access online. But I knew someone who did. Jake. I grabbed my keys, called him on speaker, and drove straight to his house. He met me outside holding a mug of coffee and wearing a Colorado Rockies cap like always. "Got your text. What's going on now?" he asked, concerned. I showed him the message. Jake squinted at the screen, then nodded slowly. I wouldn't be surprised. Karen handled the HOA books herself for years. A few people asked questions last year, but she always dodged them. "You still have login access?" He smiled. "Oh yeah. They think I'm just the quiet old vet in the corner. They forget I used to run logistics for the Navy." We sat down in his study while he logged into the HOA's private member portal. He clicked through a few tabs: general announcements, bylaws, voting history, and then the budget reports. Jake scrolled down the latest file labeled Quarterly Expense Summary, Evergreen Heights HOA. He opened it, and we both leaned in. There it was, line item after line item. But something jumped out immediately. Land beautification and property integration, $93,000. "What the heck is that?" I muttered. Jake clicked into the detailed breakdown. The expenses were vague. Bulldozer rental, survey fees, architectural consulting, bribes. Yes, actual hospitality fees listed under anonymous invoices. Then one line turned both our stomachs. Karen Wilkins, Community Expansion Consulting Services, $18,000. Jake's jaw dropped. She paid herself? I leaned back in my chair, furious. She was funneling HOA money into her own pocket to fund the takeover plan. She wasn't just harassing me, she was profiting off it. Jake kept scrolling. More payments, duplicate charges, even a legal preparation fee to a lawyer firm that turned out to be run by Karen's cousin. We printed everything. The anonymous email wasn't lying. This wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had been bleeding her community dry, using the HOA as a personal piggy bank while hiding behind bylaws and fake permits. And now, her hand-picked replacement, Rebecca, was walking in her footsteps. "Let's take this to the sheriff," Jake said. I shook my head. "Not yet. If we go straight to the sheriff, it stays quiet. No, the neighborhood deserves to see this in public." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're planning something, aren't you?" I smiled. "Oh yeah, I'm calling a town hall." The following week, with the help of a few fed-up Evergreen Heights residents, we organized an emergency HOA member meeting. We called it a Transparency Community Review Session, but everyone knew what it was really about. I rented a small tent, set up speakers, chairs, and even printed dozens of flyers inviting everyone to come, learn the truth about their HOA dues. The turnout? Huge. Over 80 residents showed up. Karen didn't come. Rebecca did. And she looked nervous. Jake and I sat up front with a projector. I stepped up to the mic. "Thank you all for coming. My name is Marcus Dalton. I live just past the ridge, and many of you already know the trouble I've had with this HOA." There were murmurs and nods. "I've been called a squatter, harassed, fined, and had the police called on me for living on land my grandfather owned. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of you." I clicked the first slide. The financial report appeared on the screen, and gasps filled the tent. I walked them through it, line by line, highlighting every suspicious charge, every false contract, and especially the payments made directly to Karen under fake service descriptions. Rebecca stood up and tried to interrupt. Jake stepped forward. "Don't," he warned calmly. "Let the man finish." When I showed them the invoice with Karen's cousin's law firm and the $93,000 total tagged for beautification, the room exploded. "You mean she was paying herself?" "She said that was for the trail project." I pay $200 in dues every quarter for this? Rebecca couldn't answer. She turned, grabbed her folder, and left without saying another word. I ended the meeting with a simple statement. You were lied to, and someone needs to answer for it. If we don't stop this now, it won't just be me they target. It'll be any one of you who dares to question them. The people clapped. Some stood. Many walked over to shake my hand. That night, my phone didn't stop ringing. HOA members were demanding a full audit. Others were drafting petitions to dissolve the current board. A few even offered to help me sue Karen and Rebecca personally for damages. But karma, it wasn't done yet. The very next morning, a sheriff's vehicle rolled up Evergreen Boulevard. Jake called me again. You're going to want to see this. I jumped in my truck and drove over. Karen's house was swarming with deputies. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a gray robe, hair a mess, shouting at officers. A man in a suit from the county prosecutor's office handed her a legal document. She screamed, "No, this is my money. I did it for the community. I built this place." The officer replied coldly, "Ma'am, you've been charged with embezzlement, misuse of funds, and fraud. You'll need to come with us." Neighbors gathered silently along the sidewalks, watching the self-made HOA queen get handcuffed on her own marble steps. They didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They just stared. And as Karen was driven away, I finally felt the weight lift off my chest. But I knew it wasn't over yet, because a week later, I got a letter in the mail again, this time from a state agency, the State Property Board, and what it said was about me. I stood on my porch, envelope in hand, staring at the return address stamped on the top left corner, Colorado State Property and Boundary Review Board. My stomach twisted. It wasn't a name I recognized from my daily life, but I knew what it meant. I tore it open carefully, heart pounding, while Duke circled my boots, whining softly. The letter was brief, maybe only 4 paragraphs long, but it felt like a wrecking ball to my chest. Dear Mr. Dalton, following a complaint and review process initiated by the Evergreen Heights Homeowners Association, your land ownership boundaries are now under formal state review. This is a procedural step required to evaluate disputed claims related to land development, utility access, and communal impact. You will be required to present your documentation and evidence at the upcoming hearing scheduled for... I stopped reading. They were escalating. This wasn't just about HOA harassment anymore. The state was now involved, and they were using Karen's original false reports, likely backed by the HOA board's vote, as justification to reopen my land boundary. I clenched the edge of the letter. No matter how hard I fought, they kept pushing back, trying to chip away at my peace, my rights, my home. Duke barked suddenly, breaking my thoughts. Jake's truck was pulling into the driveway. He stepped out and saw my expression. "Bad news?" he asked, already guessing the answer. I handed him the letter. He read it, face turning grim. "They're trying to run the long game," he said. "Karen may be gone, but she laid the groundwork. This is her parting gift." "Then I'll bring the roof down with it," I said, my voice low. I spent the next week gathering everything, not just the original land deed, not just the environmental photos or the financial corruption documents. I pulled out old family photos, pictures of my grandfather building the ranch with his bare hands, standing beside fence posts in the exact areas they were trying to steal. I even contacted the local historical society. Turns out, my ranch had been featured in a community exhibit years ago as one of the last standing pre-zoning properties in the entire county. It was history, and I was ready to prove it. The hearing was scheduled in the county courthouse, publicly open to residents from both Evergreen Heights and beyond. The room was packed. Some people came to support me, some came out of curiosity, and a few, particularly the newer board members of the HOA, came hoping I'd lose. I stepped up to the long desk where 3 state officials sat with solemn faces. The lead reviewer, a woman named Ms. Hollis, adjusted her glasses and said, "Mr. Dalton, you may begin." I didn't give a speech. I gave evidence, slide after slide, Map after map, official surveys, notarized documents, historic records, even video footage of the bulldozers trespassing across my land. I showed them the false invoices. I showed them the photos of Karen directing workers beyond the boundary lines. And lastly, I pulled out my father's handwritten land journal, which he kept for decades. In it were pages upon pages of notes about the fence lines, crops planted, even natural disasters like the flood of '82. Every note had a date and timestamp. I opened it to the page titled Westfield Rock Edge Survey and read aloud, "Boundary line reconfirmed with Jake's dad and the county marker in place. No one can take this. This land is ours. Signed, Dalton Sr." When I finished, the room was silent. Ms. Hollis leaned in. "And to confirm, you have no affiliation with the HOA?" "None whatsoever," I said. "Nor did my father, nor my grandfather." "And all improvements were made without HOA assistance?" "Every beam, board, wire, and seed," I answered. She nodded. The other officials whispered among themselves. 1 hour later, they returned with their ruling. "We find no evidence that the Evergreen Heights HOA holds jurisdiction over Mr. Dalton's property. All prior claims are hereby dismissed, and a cease and desist order will be issued against any further annexation attempts." The courtroom erupted in claps. Some people cheered, others gasped. And the HOA members who had come hoping to see me lose? They left quietly, heads down. Rebecca wasn't there. I later learned she'd resigned the morning of the hearing. Cowards never stayed to watch their mess get cleaned up. A week later, life began returning to normal. The news outlets covered the ruling. My ranch was mentioned in 3 regional newspapers. One article even titled it, "The Man Who Defeated the HOA." It made me laugh. I wasn't a hero. I was just a man who refused to be bullied. But karma? Karma still had one last twist. One bright sunny morning, I was out back mending the new west fence when a car pulled into the drive. It was an older sedan. From it stepped a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, brown hair tied back, modest clothes, eyes full of emotion. She walked up slowly, holding something wrapped in a cloth. "Mr. Dalton?" she asked gently. "Yes." She extended the wrapped object. "I'm Karen's daughter, Lisa." My muscles tensed slightly. I'm sorry for what she did to you. I didn't agree with any of it. I live in another state. But when everything happened, her arrest, the hearing, I started reading, watching the news. I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to her. Most people never could. I didn't know what to say. She looked down and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a framed photo, my ranch taken decades ago. "It was in my grandmother's old photo box," she said. "I thought maybe it should return to you." I took it with trembling hands. It was a photo of my grandfather, smiling in front of the original barn. Duke's great-great-grandfather sitting at his feet. "I don't expect forgiveness," she whispered, "but maybe peace." I looked at the photo, then back at her, and for the first time since this war began, I felt a tear rise in my eye. "Thank you," I said softly. "This means more than you know." She nodded, turned, and walked back to her car. And as she drove away, I looked out over the land I nearly lost. The land I refused to give up. I bent down and ran my fingers through the soil. It was still home. Still mine. Still standing. And always will be. Where are you watching from? Did this story hit home? Drop your city or state in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more real stories of sweet karma and the fight for what's right.